It's my pleasure to be kicking off the first of our plenary panel sessions today. And I'm focusing on really the theme of today of what do we need to learn from 2020, a year like no other, of course, as we've already heard this morning. Yes, a year where we have had, we are still living through a global pandemic with issues such as we've heard about already, the COVID track and trace, an app issue, summer A-level results issues. We've also, of course, as Liz Denham mentioned, we've seen issues around police data use. We've had conversations already this year around the use of facial recognition technology. And of course, significant events like the Black Lives Matter movement that have really increased our understanding and public awareness and raised questions and more concerns around how data is being used, particularly across society. So the panel today is really to get into a bit of the devil of the detail about what are some of the key lessons we need to learn from what has happened this year. What are some of the key issues, challenges, questions, tough questions perhaps, and also, let's face it, what progress have we seen this year as a community as well? So we have an amazing panel of experts for you to hear from today, and it's my absolute thrill to welcome them all to the Tech UK Digital Ethics Summit. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and also kick off our discussion with a bit of an opening question from all of them as they do introduce themselves, which is very much to kick off the discussions of, from their perspectives, what are the key lessons or key issues that they think we need to learn from what has happened this year to really kick off our discussion. So with that, I'm going to turn to Kay, Firth Butterfield. Kay, if you could perhaps just introduce yourself to everybody at the summit and then kick us off with your perspective of what are the key issues or lessons you think we need to take from 2020. Thank you.
Certainly, Sue. Thank you. And thank you very much for inviting me to join you today. I'm Kay Firth Butterfield, and I am head of AI and machine learning at the World Economic Forum. And what I do is work on policy and governance of AI around the world through 13 different countries where we have offices, and with governments, including the UK. So, what have we been seeing this past year in 2020? Well, obviously, as soon as the pandemic came up, the forum partnered immediately with the World Health Organization and our partners who are in the pharma industry. So all the big pharma people are part of the World Economic Forum. So we immediately brought the right community together to discuss the pandemic. And also we've been working on the Common Pass initiative to help people to get back to traveling safely. But in my work, where, as I say, we're looking more at governance and policy of AI, we haven't seen any change. And I think that that's actually wonderful to be able to say, because it means that people have still, despite the pandemic, got the need to have AI governance at the top of their mind. And so that's government still working in that area. So just last week, we worked with the Department of Defense of the United States for a whole week on a procurement of artificial intelligence and making that responsible procurement. We see that in businesses where businesses of all stripes who are adopting AI are still working with us on thinking about self-governance. We see that, and it was great for Liz to say 2021 will be the year of the child. Maria and I have been working with UNICEF all year on the report that they produced around AI and children. And we've been working to also sort of think about how should children interact with some of the toys, for example, that will be on the shelves at Christmas. And will.i.am will lead a judging panel in April around those toys. So very much, 2020 has been very much operationalizing ethics, gaining trust as normal for us?
Thank you, Kay. That's great insight. And I think we'll get more into those issues of operationalizing ethics as well. Edwina, perhaps I can come to you. And Edwina Dunn, it's amazing to have you with us as well. Perhaps just introduce yourselves to everybody and then give us your perspectives on what lessons or takeaways as we approach the end of 2020 we may need to think about. That would be great. Thanks. Okay, I think we're having trouble, Edwina, hearing you. Okay.
Is that better?
That is better. Loud and clear, Edwina. Thank you. Sorry about that.
No, that's quite all right. Yes, hello. Thank you, Sue. I'm a board member of the CDEI, which, as you heard from Elizabeth Denham, is an independent advisory body. We're looking at the governance of AI and data-driven technologies. We want to maximize innovation. We want to increase the benefits that we can yield from that innovation, but at the same time, we want to balance it with the ethics of how data is used and to make sure it's distributed equally, or the benefits distributed equally across society. So that's really the purpose, balancing innovation with what should be the controls and the things we're not allowed to do, which at a time of massive increase in both data and innovation is quite hard because the baseline keeps moving. The more data, the more creativity, the more we can do, but doesn't mean that we should do it. So I think what's happened in the last year is we've sort of been propelled forwards into the fastest learning curve imaginable. We've discovered that we do need technology and we can use data to help us solve some of the biggest world problems. But with that comes some painful learning. The path of innovation is fraught with well-intentioned mistakes. And so I think in moving forwards, we have to be aware that we are never, ever going to get a completely smooth curve, but to help us ensure the maximum effectiveness of growth and achievement, I think we have to understand the landscape and what are the things that, we need to make sure people understand. And it is all about public engagement, public trust. But to do that, we first have to understand, then explain, and then create the parameters.
Great, Edwina. Thank you so much. So much to unpack there as well. Stephen, perhaps I can come to you next. Really great to have you with us as well. Perhaps, I'm sure everybody knows who you are already, but perhaps just introduce yourself and then give us what your lesson from 2020 is. Thanks.
Thank you, Sue, and thanks for the invitation to join you. Hopefully you can hear me. Yes, good. Right, so I'm Stephen Metcalfe. I'm a Member of Parliament for South Basildon and East Thurrock. I'm a former chairman of the Science and Technology Committee, but probably more pertinent to this discussion is that I co-chair the All-Party Parliamentary Group on AI. It was a group that was established 4 years ago, and it was in response to the misuse of language that was flying around Parliament around AI, data, machine learning, neural nets, all that sort of thing. And we decided, my co-chair and I, that we wanted to establish a group that could become the authoritative voice on all things AI. And I have to say, I think we've come a long way over the last 4 years. I mean, in general terms, I think there is a far greater understanding of the implication of wide adoption of AI and perhaps a better understanding of what it can and also can't do. I think there's an acceptance that we need to ensure that technology is developed safely and that it's deployed against certain level of governance, that this is not a technology that isn't without potential consequences. And therefore we must have appropriate ethical and regulatory framework in which to operate. Because sadly over the years I think we've seen too many failures which have probably not helped our overall cause, from facial recognition software that would not recognise those from certain ethnic backgrounds, to recruitment software trained using the existing employee data, which ended up embedding the bias towards certain types of people within an organisation, to chatbots being trolled and being trained by a public to be acting appropriately, and of course to algorithms to determine exam results, as we saw this year, and we know how that ended, which I think, as Faye said, I think it was Elizabeth said, has potentially done great damage to the trustworthiness of algorithms and AI. Therefore, embedding, in my views, suitable ethical principles into systems is absolutely paramount to ensure that the outcomes are for the greater good and deliver the results that not only do we expect, but that we will accept. And because, of course, this technology has huge potential, and we've seen some of that huge potential, but as has been mentioned before, it has to be trusted. And the building block of that is, of course, suitable authenticated data that, in my view, has to reflect the cohort that you wish to interact with. Because if it doesn't do that, you're going to obviously train in potentially bias. And there lies the challenge. How do you do that if you're doing it on a national level where decisions have serious consequences? If you turn on your iPhone and it doesn't give you the right apps in the morning, it's hardly a matter of life or death. However, if you're using it to make policy decisions in how you potentially tackle a pandemic, that could be quite a serious issue. I think one of the advantages we've had this year in terms of educating the public more towards the understanding of data is the fact that a lot of the response to COVID has been data driven. We've seen it shared on a daily basis. People pore over it who may never examined data before. But of course, the issue with that is therefore that data has to be unquestionable. And at times we have had perhaps data presented in a way that hasn't always necessarily been helpful. I suppose the final point I want to make before we go over to the discussion is that if we're looking at ethics, digital ethics, I think it goes further than actually the ethics of digital design and innovation. It's about what are the ethics around the digital divide and access both to connectivity and to equipment. And this is something that I think we need to take another fresh look at. If we are becoming more and more dependent on the use of technology. People are adopting it. We've seen people working from home, and for some that's fine. They've got 4 devices around the place, everyone connected to super fast broadband, working and learning effectively. However, if you don't have the equipment, you don't have the connectivity, that divide, that gap grows bigger. And I think that is something we must take into account. And the other final point is around potentially, because of the pandemic and the way in which we have all had to look at new ways to connect, we have a whole new range of people who are adopting and taking up the use of technology, who perhaps don't have the experience to know where the pitfalls lie and what it is that they are giving away potentially when they tick that accept user guidance box. And this goes back to a key point I've made many times before, which is that we need a wider discussion around data and a public understanding of what data is and what people are giving away and how it could potentially affect them at some point in the future. Thank you.
Great, Stephen. Thank you so much. And again, some really important points there, which I think, and perhaps we'll come on to this in the discussion, have perhaps always been there, but have just been amplified this year in such a great way that now are really on the top of people's lists. And Maria, I'd love to come to you. Great to have you with us, and great to have PwC supporting the summit. So thank you so much. But lovely to, it'd be great to have your kind of, I suppose, what's on your list of what you would take away or lessons learned from 2020. But please just introduce yourself to everybody as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sue, and delighted to be here and delighted to be supporting the work of Tech UK. I'm Maria Accente, PwC UK. I'm responsible AI and AI for Good lead, and my work is in fact very much linked with what we've discussed at this topic, is operationalizing AI ethics across our AI operations and products and services. And it's been a fantastic year because we have experienced for ourselves the task ahead of us, how complex it is, how much we need to prepare for the change and disruption is coming, and the fact that we need to be patient and brave, if you want. But the key lessons that I will take from this year was that building tech is hard, right? It's complex. We have seen with the contract tracing app that it's not easy peasy. It's not something that you do with a bunch of developer in a garage or even set in an office. Is a complex work like any engineering. It takes time, it takes money, it takes a lot of resources. And like always, technology is not something that is done in abstraction from the context. Is sometimes, and most of the times, is an evolution of previous technological developments. And as a result, it has this scaffolding effect, right? So whatever we build is built on a current structure. Therefore, there's a lot of implication with that alone. So I think this is a big, haha moment or wow moment of the year when people have experienced that it's difficult to build tech. And it's not as straightforward and requires testing, especially when you do it at scale as the contract tracing have done. The second one, which one probably it makes me the happiest about, is that the public scrutiny and advocacy actually works. Right, we have seen, our efforts of raising awareness and educating the public to become active citizens actually working out, and you see how much the public has. Alongside media, so kudos to our media. This time they have been spot on and they were able to draw attention to certain application and use cases. And we have seen, a flurry of events, like obviously the big news of 2020 is the facial recognition ban, and the fact that many tech companies have decided not to work on this technology, to give space to the legislator and policymaker to think alongside the civil society this technology and the impact it has on multiple levels, but of course the A level, of course more recently the employees performance tools from both Amazon and Microsoft have been under the microscope, and with that it gives us a sense of the developments will not happen in the shades, right? So this scrutiny calls for higher transparency, and transparency is the foundation for trustworthiness, which is in fact what we need to build trust with this technology. And lastly, something that we have seen from industry, because obviously I work in the industry, is the fact that many organizations are considering operationalizing ethics seriously this time, right? So COVID has, and bear with me, I'm saying something now that could be controversial, a positive impact, but it has on adoption of AI. 95% of the C-suite we have surveyed recently, they have said they are thinking or already deploying AI in different formats, either scale or experimentation. But also, which is really important, is that 50% of the CFOs, those guys with the checks, they've actually said that they are committing to automation, which is the building block for AI. And in this context, right, the focus on ethics has considerably increased, and especially we see this in UK, where we have seen this, public debates and engagement around AI ethics, and the current summit is a part of this series of events that will allow for this raise of awareness. And while there's still not a consistent approach, and there's a lot of fragmentation and narrow approach how this operationalization happens. So, for example, 64% of companies have principals. 43% have boards. So, what Liz said earlier, I think we have a very strong foundation to build on. But probably what's really interesting is to see that AI risk has become a very important topic for the AI adoption in general, with 66% of companies actually doing something. But what's a little bit surprising is the fact that the principles that are most important for UK are robustness and data privacy, was obviously the context of so many data-driven innovation in the context of COVID, but also human agency. So where and how the humans remain in control with those operations of AI. The last thing I want to say, probably the biggest lesson for us all, is that embedding ethics takes time. We are facing a fundamental change and disruption with this. Therefore, we should not expect immediate results. We should give ourselves time. But I'm very optimistic that we have had a fantastic year and we can see progress. Progress when it matters the most, in organizations that have scale and resources to have significant impact, and they're thinking about it and they're thinking it thoroughly. So kudos to everyone in the community, the ethics community, digital data, AI, for making a noise. The noise has been heard, and now we are on action. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria, and that's a great way to sum up. Actually, drawing a couple of threads, really, it seems to be that you're all kind of saying that we are, in 2020, we have moved forward, but perhaps in different ways, and we can touch on some of those. But I wanted to come back to the kind of, we're moving forward. Obviously, we haven't solved all the issues. Of course, there are still some really big issues there. And I think, as Liz said, we won't get to the end of 2020. These conversations and these issues will continue. But one that's come up, and it's a common thread, is around public debate and public conversation around whether it's, Stephen, I was thinking your comments around data. Perhaps we've talked about data more than we've ever talked about before. And Edwina, I wanted to come to you in terms of, talk about the importance of innovation. Do you think that the public debate and the discussion that we've had this year around these issues is going to help in terms of build public understanding and perhaps trust in innovations, which is key, right, to realizing the potential of what we could see coming down the line?
Yes, I think there's no doubt that everybody has suddenly become more aware of technology than I think anybody could have imagined. I mean, the fact that we all, talk about Zoom or Teams or Skype or whatever and struggle to make sure that we can communicate well has really set that path. And I think it's become an expectation. It's almost like a new, benchmark of how we connect and what we do. I think with that comes the understanding that every footprint that we make through technology is creating this raft of data. And, I think, as we've been looking at Christmas shopping and things like that, and we're trying to buy something, and up pops this, do you accept the consents of giving your data? I mean, I'm so bad. I just go, yes, because I'm in a hurry. Yes. Do I read it? Do I study it? No, because I think there's a real expectation from the public that someone is going to look after them. Someone is going to make sure that bad things don't happen. And that's a really huge responsibility because, data now can be present anywhere in the world. And I think, Kay will probably know better than anyone else. The regulations all differ. And so we don't know where our data is being held. We don't know whether it's being held in an app or a central database. It was one of the discussions on track and trace, wasn't it? And we don't know if someone's going to put it together with other data. At the same time, I think people love the idea that they can go onto a website, be remembered, click, and buy or do something really, really easily. So that sort of frictionless that comes from knowing the person, being able to identify them, recognizing what they've done before, are like real plus points for us. So there's this real juxtaposition of, I love it when I go onto a website, you know, where they've got my favorites from the last time I bought. I can just go, yeah, I'll have that again and I'll have that again. We love that. But at the same time, we worry when there's this unknown, unquantified pool that sort of talks about us and collects all of our data. So it's a really interesting thing, and it's a growing challenge, and it's not one that I think could easily put into one rule set and one box, which is what makes it fun, challenging, a bit scary.
Yeah, it's definitely a comment that we've heard, or a term we've heard a lot this year, of there's no silver bullet, right? And Stephen, to building public trust and confidence that you raised so much about, there is no silver bullet here, right? But what do you think we've managed to get right this year, and perhaps what have we not got right, perhaps in that way?
Okay, so and I think what we have got right is that we have seen those who are already aware of technology and data, etc., become more dependent and more engaged with it. And that's that idea that, you know, you visit a website, you see a list of favorites, you click on that. We're probably informed that there is someone potentially behind that, making sure that that data isn't abused. But we don't know it for certain. And I think that that's really where we need some reassurances, because some of those favorites could be used to make a judgment about your lifestyle and about your choices. And in someone else's hands, that could not necessarily be to your benefit. And I think, you know, what Edwina said at the beginning was that we've become more dependent on technology. We Zoom, we Teams, etc. But where I have the greatest concern is that we haven't necessarily brought everyone along with us. There are tracts of society who are harder to reach, who still have shied away from that technology because of the pace at which perhaps the majority picked it up and ran with it. And so, and this is always my point, is how do you get to the hard to reach who aren't engaged in this, but will have probably suffered or be affected by the consequences of it equally, if not more, if you're not engaged or aware of the technology. And of course, trust is important. And getting people to understand what trust is also vitally important. You're right, when you click that agreement, you assume someone's acting on your behalf to protect you. Until you're told not to trust them. And the example I always go back to is the care.data approach, where the government wanted to use people's health data to try and improve health outcomes. But because certain sectors said, you know, this is a misuse of your data, the public trusted the media, newspapers, social media more than they would trust the health professionals who wanted to make them well. And so there is always a dichotomy, or how do you get that balance right and persuade people that where trusted sources are. And then that goes back to fake news and all the other various issues.
No, it's very balance seems to be a key word of this year as well, and how we get that right. It's really important to, you know, we're talking about how we get trust and confidence right. I'd love to bring Kay back in terms of, you mentioned, and then Maria, of course, around, we've seen organizations operationalizing ethical principles, guidelines, codes, frameworks this year, and putting, Maria was talking about putting these things into action. And I just wondered, Kate, from your experience, have we done enough to translate all the ethical principles, such as trust and confidence and transparency, into how organizations are putting these things into practice? And from your perspective, is what you've seen this year, is it enough, or is there more that needs to be done to help organizations, you know, really make ethics into, you know, real practical action? What have we really got right this year? Perhaps it's the same question, and what perhaps is still left to be done, or still to be done?
Certainly. So I think that we're seeing countries begin to understand that this work needs to be done, and different people are in different places. So, for example, we're working with the Indian government to operationalize their a chapter on AI ethics. You start with a national AI strategy, but then what does that actually mean in reality? So I think that countries, and just yesterday, the United States announced that they were going to have a national AI strategy, or Congress was going to think about that. So I think countries are beginning to move forward, and I'm seeing that both in the global South, and obviously the global North is, and particularly Europe is much further ahead than anyone else. I think that the tech companies, we're seeing that they're getting it, but they're also, through some work that we're doing, learning from one another still, which is great, and we want to see that. But as Maria said, there's a wide adoption coming of artificial intelligence. Every company will be an AI company. But what we're not seeing so much amongst our members, and that's what I'm working on, is, you're a healthcare company. Now you're using AI. You need to have the same ethical tools as the technology companies. And so I think that there's a lot of work to be done, transferring those tools to other companies in other sectors that are using AI. And so automation, you're going to be in advanced manufacturing, for example, and you're automating some of the tasks. We need to be ensuring that you're thinking about, for example, human agency that Maria talked about. So I think that what we're still missing, and it's something we're trying to address with the New Zealand government, is a true public debate. How do we actually bring the general public? And perhaps that's part of the benefit of 2020, in that everybody knows more about technology, but we still really haven't engaged in a proper debate with the general public. And I would also say, we sit here and talk about artificial intelligence and data all the time, but in many parts of the world, including, I'm based in America. That's why I'm drinking my tea. It's early in the morning. I have to have my tea. We still don't have good access to broadband. We still have kids sitting outside McDonald's so they can get educated. And so that infrastructure is still a hugely important thing for 2021. We can't grow AI without having the infrastructure.
That's a great point, and great link to Stephen was talking about the access to digital technologies, and that issue that's really been brought to the forefront this year as well. And perhaps we'll come back to that. But Maria, I just wanted to bring you in terms of Kay's input and response, particularly because of your role in helping organisations to operationalise these principles, putting them into action. Would you agree that we're seeing, or perhaps we've seen this year, movement in some sectors but not in others? And what are organisations perhaps needing that they're not getting right now in terms of to move this forward? What do you think in terms of the progress that's been made within organisations this year from your perspective?
I think that's a very interesting question. I want to build what Kay said earlier about the transfer of tools between tech industry and non-tech industry. But I will say there is a little bit of lessons learned vice versa, right? So we other industries, other corporations that have a longer life than 20 years have experienced business ethics, right? Which is a very good vehicle to operationalize ethics, right? We have learned a lot. So perhaps it's something companies that have been good at business ethics, being able to transfer to tech companies who have not had to have this conversation. And I remember Francesca Rossi saying in 2018, there are, two types of ethics when it comes to AI. Is the computational ethics, the system ethics that you apply to technology itself. It's the corporate ethics. And I think we need to be bringing that back and have this conversation holistically, right? Systemically. And this is where most of the organizational struggle, because they have this narrow approach and they say, let's have a code of conduct, let's have impact assessment, let's have boards. but they have not connected all those initiatives together and say, but what's the reason we have a board, and how will the board use the principles and then cascade to other parts of the organization, and how the decision making happens, and what's really important, the ethical reasoning. I think the biggest problem that exists at the moment in industry is a misframing of the term ethics itself. The fact there was a lot of conversation on the operational side of ethics, that's what we call operationalizing, but little conversation on the actual ethical analysis and reasoning, where the academics are the strongest, where you bring the academic expertise and, for example, the bioethics experience in actually debating whether this technology in a specific context has some moral implication or not. And I think that's what we need from companies. First, to understand the right framing, and this is where working with Kay's team for a new toolkit to reframe or frame the ethics for C-suite in a correct way, also with Oxford University and with Cambridge, to make sure that the decision makers understand, have the correct framing and the implication of ethics as a strategic initiative, not a tactical one, a one that delivers tangible benefits to the overall KPIs. And the secondly is this systemic approach, the fact that we need to be looking at how to connect all these different initiatives and prioritize it, have a roadmap, because addressing it all is terrifying. And having one group do principles, another group do the boards, and another group doing the product alignment, it's not sustainable over time. So I feel like in terms of what industries and how the industry are doing, TMT is a big one. You know, lots of conversation around data ethics and privacy in TMT, which is the telecom, media, and communication. Financial services has been there, you know, traditionally. I think that they are coming with a more risk approach towards ethics, but also increasingly the public institution, the government, local and central government, lots of the departments that are concerned, they have the benefit of having CDAI in the house and benefit from fantastic work the APGG is doing. And kudos to the team. I'm a proud member in the advisory board alongside Stephen and team. And how do you translate all this in operational structures and actions? That's difficult. And I think it's also a little bit of concern. What is the disruption that will trigger? What will be the consequences we start doing this in changing the BAU in a context where we are fighting for survival, really? So I think all this is on the mind of the C-suite, but hopefully with the correct framing and a bit of prioritization and an agile roadmap, we will be able to see even more progress after 2021.
That's a fascinating view, because I come back to the kind of the challenge, perhaps, Maria, that we have. And perhaps a question to all of you: have we seen, or have you seen, a kind of more of an increased or growing skepticism around the whether digital ethics as a community or as an issue can really make a difference, particularly what we've faced this year, and whether, therefore, I'm wondering, Maria, if a reframing of the conversation or what we mean by digital ethics in 2020 and 2020 beyond is what we need to try and overcome, if there has been an increase in the skepticism. I don't know if that's something you think that would help with that.
It is. It is. It will help fantastic. You know, from strategy, the strategy science, if you don't frame it correctly, we won't be able to have a sustainable strategy. It's the same in social sciences. Without, you know, correct framing, you're not able to understand the phenomenon. So I think, yes, we are in desperate need, and actually speak the language of those in the industry and outside that are in charge, that ethics is not Aristotle and Kant and Hume, right? It's something that it's much more profound than that. It's about the moral judgment of the day-to-day actions. And we don't ask those questions in businesses, because business ethics or an ethical business has become a good business. So I think we have to take a step back and reframe the ethics with the perspective, but you know, a good business is an ethical business. A good technology is an ethical technology, and demonstrate this link in between an ethical or unethical organization will produce ethical or unethical tech. So we need to be very careful here, because AI is like a mirror. Will keep us honest, right? We cannot hide. So look around, there's all those cases, and judge for yourselves.
Absolutely. And I'll come to Kay, but then I want to come back to a point that Maria was talking about, is that there's a lot going on, right? And how do we ensure that we could, coordinate this and I suppose avoid duplication and work together. And Edwina, I'd love to come to you in a minute in terms of what the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation's role is to help make that possible. But Kay, I saw your non-digital hand was up, so I thought I'd come to you before I come back to Edwina.
To continue to be human, put my hand up. So I just wanted to say that one of the ways that I have been talking to businesses about ethics is, if they're put off by the word ethics, they understand me when I say AI ethics is just your problems in using AI. These problems will affect your bottom line because they will affect customer confidence in your business. And so, if you reframe it in that way, you suddenly have the C-suite and the board listening to you a lot more. And it may feel like selling out to the AI ethics debate, but frankly, so long as I get them to listen to me, I will frame it in any way that I can.
That's a great point. Edwina, so I wanted to bring you in on the point around there's a lot of activity going on, and how do we kind of bring this all together and help, and I suppose to follow up on Kay's point as well, there's a role of making sure we talk about this in the right language, right? And I think the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation has a really important role to play there. Would you agree, in terms of getting the conversation, framing the conversation so that it helps move us forward? And I just wondered whether you feel we've done enough of that this year, or if not, what's the missing gap that perhaps we need to focus on next year?
Yes, I mean, I think this is an incredibly important perspective. I mean, in truth, perception is reality. I mean, the conversations that are out there, I don't know whether you've all seen The Social Dilemma, but, the projection of the fact that we are all manipulated by algorithms is something that, a lot of people have seen. So it's really important that this sort of idea of manipulation, or as Stephen said, fake news, which is this idea that, reality begins to disappear because we're served out different things depending on who we are and kind of what the intention or the movement is behind that. So I think communicating very, very simply is vitally important so that we can take as many people as possible with us. And I think the thing that the centre is focusing on is some work around something we're calling AI assurance, which is really an AI accountability ecosystem. So it's really a framework for findings, the way in which we can look at AI systems and really assess whether they're doing what's intended, whether they're doing that fairly and transparently. And, it's a big task. And I think, it will have to be sector by sector. But I think the idea that there need to be principles adhered to and a way of giving people the kind of assurance that they need, that if they are being manipulated, at least that be made transparent. To what extent? Because at least then people can make that decision or be aware that that's how they're being treated.
Oh, it's a fascinating piece of work. I'd love to hear more about that. Stephen, I wanted to come to you as well to kind of maybe ask you as well in terms of, as I mentioned after you spoke at the beginning, you raised a lot of really key issues, but I'm wondering whether they are new issues or whether they're issues that have always been there, but perhaps this year have just amplified them and brought them to the front. And if so, if we're talking about the same issues, have we seen enough progress in how we're talking about this? Or is it, if we haven't, do you think it's time to do something different? Is there something that we're missing? Is there something more that we need to be doing? And if so, I'd love your thoughts on which which way should we now go? Is it about reframing the debate? Is it about having a different debate? Is it about bringing that more public debate that we've seen really kick off this year to the fold? And just wondering, is it now time to do something different? And if so, what do you think that might be? And I think you're on mute, Stephen.
There we go. Thank you. Right. I think that's a great question. And I think it's all three of those things. I think with the expansion in the adoption of technology, or the embracing of technology by perhaps a sector that hasn't necessarily been using it before, means that we do need to accelerate the discussion around how we can provide some form of protection or reassurance. I mean, one of the things I say is we need to teach skepticism more widely to make sure that people understand that the world is not necessarily always a safe and cozy place, and that there are people who will misuse technology for their own gain. And sadly, there are sectors of our society who are vulnerable, who fall prey to this. I mean, the latest warning that I've seen today is be careful of receiving text messages offering you a vaccine, but saying there's a price to pay for it. Potentially, this is, it's not related specifically to this area, but there is there are dangers out there. So I think that's one thing, is we need to have a discussion around the fact that just because it's digital doesn't mean it's always safe. But therefore, we need to reassure people that there are those companies who are developing technology and do want to do their part. And I think, as Maria said, an ethical business is a good business. And I think that's absolutely right. But they need to be able to demonstrate they are acting ethically and have some form of ethical registration that says, we operate in this way, and someone else has decided that we are doing what we should. And the reason I say that is that while large companies are capable of potentially having their data ethics board, etc., smaller companies, which is where a lot of innovation potentially takes place, may not have the capacity to do that and need therefore some support. And we need to find a way to offer them that. And there was a third point that I was going to make, but it has slipped my mind. I apologise for that. I know what it was. Yes, sorry. There is new technology becoming available that can authenticate news sources to try and combat some of the more widespread misinformation that's disseminated. And I think we need to accelerate that so that you have a way of tracking back where an advert, a statement has come from, that shows who's edited it and what those edits were, if you feel so inclined that this is an important piece of information that you want to understand whether it's true or not. Now, that technology can exist, but we need to find ways of making it more widely used.
Thanks, Stephen. Sadly, we are coming to the end of our time, which it always goes so incredibly quickly. But I did have a question in the chat that I wanted to throw out there before we come to a final question, and I think it might be more for Maria and Kay, but I'm gonna start with Maria, but Kay, do feel free to, or any of them, please feel free to come in. So it was a question: how do we encourage more considerate development of tools and products in the future across industry when markets seem to favour short-term reactions? So I'm wondering this year that there's a big move to digitization, a big move for we must move quickly, we must put in processes, put in technologies to keep us going. So very much a kind of through this time, then how do we then turn that into, okay, well, as people think, well, long-term digitization, how do we get that right from a digital ethics point of view as well? So just wondered whether there was any advice, or how do we help industry think about not just thinking about perhaps ethics as in it's a 2020 issue, but it's an issue that we need to be thinking about in the long term. Or are you already seeing that, Maria, from your work?
Definitely, it's an excellent question, first of all. So thank you who has asked it, because it's something that we are trying to address. The fact that we seem to have this tension in between profit and purpose, right? They seem to be positioned antagonistic to each other, and that's how they were framed. So I think we need to go back to the board and demonstrate how, in fact, putting the purpose in the middle of your business, being a small business, medium or a large one, will have short-term, medium-term and long-term benefits. Maybe, yes, of course, you'll need to invest in short-term to reposition your business and be more accountable and transparent. And that comes with a cost, right? Because you have to be rethinking how you operate, your overall operating model. But I think without solving this dilemma, we won't be able to really to articulate how ethics is driving good progress, and that was the case always. And I've heard so many times being mentioned, oh, we can't do this because we're going to lose customers. No, you're going to win customer long term, because look at the generation Greta Thunberg, right? So they are demanding ethical products, and as we are careful with the clothes and the coffee we're buying, and we are looking for the ethical stamp, as Stephen mentioned, we have to have the same for tech. For all the products that they use this, any technology, any data, and it's everywhere. So we have to have this certification that at least gives us a level of confidence that certain or the threshold have been addressed. But otherwise, I think we're still going to be locked in this antagonistic tension that exists in between profit and purpose. We should not exist. I think the regulators have understood this, part of the civil society, also the policymaker, and really important, the citizens and the consumers, and they will start demanding it. So whomever is visionary leader, they will understand and work on it, and they will be the winning business in the next year to come. The others will be laggards. So good luck to them.
Thank you, Maria, for your. Oh, sorry, Kay, very quickly, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just very quickly going to add to that I think that, we need to be saying this is part of ESG, and your duties under ESG. And also, I love the awards idea, which is why we're doing the children's awards around children's toys. And I think that, maybe things like the way that we certify blood diamonds we need to think about whether that's a good way of being able to have a chain of certification for AI product. And we're thinking about that with ARM. But mainly, I think, the takeaway is we're all doing amazing things, and we all need to be working together much more closely.
Great, Kay. Well, you kind of took my next question out of my mouth, which is the kind of takeaway, what we need to go do in 2021. So perhaps if I could be so bold as to say that's your kind of input into that question, if I may, because we're sadly running out of time. It's such a fascinating conversation. So to all of you, just a final thought, perhaps as we wrap up of, and I'd love to come to you. What's your final toughest lesson that we really need to, and not just learn for 2020, but not forget as we move forward? What would be your one, if I could say, takeaway from this year that we have to take into 2021?
So I think AI, using data, using technology, it's not going to go away. It's a torrent that's coming towards us, and we have to embrace it happily and boldly. I think what we need to focus on is what we're allowed to do, because I think the vast majority of people just want to know, what can I do? What is the right way to do it? And for us not to focus so wholeheartedly on punishing the few who are not with very positive or good practice. So I think if we can put more effort into this is what's good behavior, good ethics, if you can show the way, whether that be a stamp or the equivalent of blood diamond, I love that. And I hope that's what the CDEI is going to focus on.
Great. Thanks, Edwina. Stephen, your final thoughts? Oh, sorry, you're on mute again, Stephen. Sorry.
It's all right. There we go. My final thought is, others will touch on other points, is that we must take the public along with us on this journey. And I think we need a renewed effort to engage with probably the hardest to reach in society, not just those who are tech savvy, and so we probably all have a duty to start talking outwardly as well as continuing to have these important discussions amongst ourselves.
Great, and vitally important. Absolutely, I completely agree. Maria, final word to you.
Just building on what Kay said, we are on the right track. You know, kudos to the community, the global community have been working tirelessly the last 4 or 5 years to get us where we are. So guys, keep doing what you're doing, because you're doing great. But remain patient, remain optimistic, and keep yourself with bravery and inspire others, because a lot of things will change as a result of us using AI, and we have to be prepared for some honest truths about ourselves, a personal level, organizational level, society level. But we should not shy away from addressing this, because it's our chance to right the wrongs. And I think that everything that has happened this year with Black Lives Matters and previous years with Me Too has giving us the propulsions we need to make those fundamental changes. And I'm actually very optimistic. I end this year with a big smile and saying, oh my goodness, I'm so waiting for 2021. So thank you all who have been working so hard. And I know all of you that have been other advocates or data scientists or product managers. Your work matter, and you'll see the results in the years to come. Thank you.
Maria, I couldn't have said it better myself. So thank you so much. And I would say a rapturous virtual applause to all our panelists, to Kay, to Edwina, to Maria, and to Stephen. Thank you so much, and for kicking the summit off so brilliantly as well. Thank you so much for being with us. And unfortunately, that ends our opening plenary session for the summit today.